What if I told you that World War I didn't destroy the Russian Empire? It was already collapsing from within, bankrupted by a gold-backed ruble that nobody could afford to use. This is the untold financial crisis that made 1917 inevitable. Welcome to The Wealth Timeline, where we uncover how money, power, and history intertwine to shape the world we live in. Today, we're going back to the final decades of Imperial Russia, not to the battlefields or the Winter Palace, but to the vaults of the state bank, where a monetary experiment promised modernization and delivered catastrophe. In the late 19th century, Russia faced a crisis of credibility. The empire was vast, stretching across 11 time zones, controlling a quarter of Europe and a third of Asia. But economically, it was fragile. The ruble was unstable, backed by nothing but imperial decree and fluctuating faith. Foreign investors demanded guarantees. Western bankers wanted predictability. And Russia's finance minister, Sergei Witte, had a solution: the gold standard. Witte was a technocrat, a true believer in Western financial orthodoxy. Between 1895 and 1897, he orchestrated one of history's most dramatic monetary reforms. Russia accumulated massive gold reserves through foreign loans, grain exports, and treasury manipulation. And on January 3, 1897, the gold-backed ruble became official. On paper, it worked. Foreign investment flooded in, railways expanded, industrial output surged by 8% annually through the early 1900s. Russia appeared to be modernizing at breakneck speed, but beneath the surface, the gold standard imposed a brutal constraint: monetary rigidity and a structurally fragile economy. Russia's peasantry, 80% of the population, lived in near-subsistence conditions. Tax collection was medieval. And now, suddenly, the money supply was locked to gold reserves that the empire couldn't freely expand. Every crisis, every famine, every war would hit with full deflationary force. The question wasn't if the system would break, it was when. For a decade, the illusion held. Between 1897 and 1905, Russia's economy grew faster than any European power except Germany. Foreign capital poured into coal mines, steel mills, and textile factories. The Trans-Siberian Railway, the longest in the world, promised to link Moscow to the Pacific. Witte proclaimed Russia's entry into the modern age. But the gold standard created winners and losers. Industrial elites and urban merchants thrived. But peasants, the empire's backbone, suffered. Fixed exchange rates meant agricultural prices couldn't rise to match global markets. Tax burdens increased as the government fought to maintain gold reserves. Rural debt spiraled. By 1902, famine was spreading across the Volga region. Then came 1905. The Russo-Japanese War was a catastrophe, not just militarily, but financially. Russia lost. The treasury hemorrhaged gold to fund a distant, humiliating defeat. And when revolution erupted across the empire that year, the state bank faced a choice: break the gold standard to fund suppression, or hold the line and watch the empire burn. They held the line. Witte secured emergency loans from France, 800 million gold francs. To stabilize reserves, the ruble survived. Order was restored. But the precedent was set. When crisis came, the gold standard mattered more than the people. After 1905, Russia's economy recovered. But the structural tension deepened. The government issued bonds to maintain reserves. Peasant taxation increased. And every time a harvest failed or a crisis loomed, deflation bit harder. By 1914, Russia's gold reserves stood at 1.7 billion rubles, the third largest in the world. The currency was pristine, but the empire was a powder keg. August 1914, World War I. Within weeks, everything Witte had built began to collapse. War requires flexibility, the ability to print money, mobilize resources, and inflate away debt. But Russia was chained to gold. The state bank couldn't expand the money supply without draining reserves, and as millions of men left the fields for the front, food production collapsed. By December 1914, the gold standard was suspended. The government began printing in paper rubles, not backed by gold. Within 2 years, the money supply increased by 600%. Inflation exploded. Prices doubled by 1916, then doubled again. Bread became scarce. Fuel vanished. Workers in Petrograd earned wages that bought less each week. The urban poor, already suffering, faced starvation. And the peasants, who had been taxed and squeezed for 2 decades to maintain gold reserves, now watched their savings evaporate. The tragic irony: Russia had entered the war with one of the world's strongest currencies, but the gold standard had left the economy so brittle, so unable to absorb shocks, that when flexibility was finally needed, the system shattered. By 1916, military spending consumed 80% of the budget. The deficit reached 14 billion rubles. Inflation was running at 300% annually, and the government, desperate, kept printing. In February 1917, bread riots erupted in Petrograd, not because of military defeat, Russia's armies were still in the field, but because people were starving in the capital of an empire that had prioritized gold over grain, the Tsar abdicated on March 15, 1917. The provisional government tried to stabilize the currency. They failed. By October, the Bolsheviks seized power, not through ideology alone, but by promising bread, land, and peace to a population bankrupted by monetary orthodoxy. The Romanov dynasty, 300 years of imperial rule, ended not with a foreign invasion, but with a currency crisis triggered by the very reform meant to save it. This isn't ancient history, it's a blueprint. Today, we see echoes of Russia as gold standard trap in every rigid monetary system that prioritizes credibility over flexibility. The Eurozone crisis of 2010-2015 followed the same logic. Countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy locked into a currency they couldn't control, unable to devalue or print during crisis, forced into austerity that deepened recessions. Argentina's 1991 convertibility plan, pegging the peso to the dollar, produced a boom, then a catastrophic bust by 2001 when the peg collapsed under debt and deflation. Even the debates over cryptocurrency and sound money echo Witte's philosophy, the belief that restricting the money supply will enforce discipline. But history teaches the opposite lesson. Rigid monetary systems don't prevent crises. They amplify them. Russia's gold standard delivered short-term confidence and long-term catastrophe. It attracted foreign capital while starving the domestic economy. It maintained currency prestige while destroying social stability. And when war came, it left the empire defenseless against inflation and collapse. The lesson? Money is a tool, not a principle. And systems that treat it as sacred, that prioritize abstract stability over human survival, inevitably break. So what should we take from this? First, monetary systems are political choices with human consequences. The gold standard wasn't neutral. It redistributed wealth upward, crushed the rural economy, and made crisis response impossible. Second, credibility without flexibility is a trap. Witte's reforms won Russia access to global capital, but left the empire unable to adapt when shocks arrived. Third, currency collapse is a symptom, not a cause. The ruble's destruction in 1914-1917 didn't create Russia's crisis. It revealed structural fragility that 2 decades of gold orthodoxy had masked. The Romanovs fell because they chose currency stability over social survival, and in doing so, they proved a timeless truth. Empires don't collapse when their money fails. They fail when their money becomes more important than the people who use it. Because in the timeline of wealth, every rise comes with a hidden cost. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon. Because history's next secret is already unfolding.